Good evening and welcome to this brand new Startup Central. I'm Nayantara Rai. It's the third day of the new show, part of the new Primetime Rise with India. And we've got a big story breaking on the bottom of your screens on a day where Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo, is in the country meeting with the External Affairs Minister, setting the stage for a meeting between Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi to iron out differences. Call it a coincidence or whatever way you want to see it. Piyush Goyal, the Commerce Minister, in Parliament has said national security will never be compromised for Indo-US ties. We're going to play you that soundbite. And separately, the Reserve Bank of India has reiterated its stance when it comes to digital payments, when it comes to data localization. All of those flashes on the bottom of your screens, where it's issued the clarification on storage of payment system data, reiterating the stance on local storage of domestic payments data, that the entire payment data shall be stored in systems located only in India. The payments data must be stored in India for 24 hours. The payment data can be shared with foreign regulators post the RBI's approval. Cross-border data, domestic components can be stored abroad. So basically, the Reserve Bank of India has come out with these very important clarifications on this entire issue. We're going to be getting you all the guests as well right now to be talking about this. Before I do that, let me go across to my correspondent, Ishita Guha, who tracks the Reserve Bank of India, joining us here. Ishita, one has to look at the optics. One has to look at the larger picture, which is that Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State, is in India. He's going to be making a speech in about 55 minutes from now. The Reserve Bank of India, meanwhile, reiterating its stance on data localization, a major irritant when it comes to the ties. But, just tell us once again what it is that the RBI has said, and then I'm going to go across to my panel of experts.
Well, the RBI has issued clarification on payment system operators and how the data has to be stored. As you rightly said, that these are the guidelines for data localization, and RBI is very strict about not storing any data outside the country. In fact, to highlight a few points in this guidelines that have been issued by RBI, one of the questions that have been asked by payment system operators, which says that where should the payment data be stored, to which RBI has responded in a very strictly worded sentence, and they have said the guideline says the entire payment data shall be stored in systems located only in India except in cases clarified herein, which means that in specific certain cases RBI will probably make an exception, but for all generic purposes, all the data by payment system operators will have to be stored only in India. The payment system operators who are operating within the domestic territory of the country cannot store their data outside. In fact, I would like to highlight one more point here. For processing of payment transaction, RBI has in fact mentioned that in case the processing is done abroad, let's say a company has some kind of transaction which has been done abroad, the data should be deleted from the systems abroad and brought back to India not later than 1 business day or 24 hours from payment processing, whichever is earlier. The same should be stored only in India. So once again, reiterating the fact that whichever data is being stored outside, and even for transactions that are taking place outside, even that data cannot be stored outside. Everything has to be brought within the country and has to function and operate within the domestic territories of the country. This could be because RBI wants that all the data is stored and is under the purview and regulation of the central bank.
Correct. This has been the point, Ishita, this is the point that the Reserve Bank of India has been making from time and again when it comes to data localization. Like I said, a major irritant when it comes to the Indo-US relations. In fact, Piyush Goyal the Commerce Minister didn't use the word data localization, but he certainly alluded to it today in Parliament while talking about the Indo-US bonhomie, talking about the various irritants. He said nothing can come in the form of national security. And data localization seems to have taken that kind of a stance. I'm going to now go across to Bipin Preet Singh, the founder of MobiWik. Bipin, thanks so much for joining us here on Startup Central. Incidentally, it's a brand new Startup Central. We now have a 60-minute long show, a breaking story coming in from the Reserve Bank of India on a day where the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in New Delhi for just 24 hours. Bipin, a lot of you had gotten accustomed to it. Would my reading would be right that it might impact firms like yours less than it would impact, let's say, credit card companies, the Visas, the MasterCards, and the American Expresses of this world?
So look, I think when these guidelines came out, though RBI was very clear that they were strict guidelines that need to be abided by everybody, but because of the nature and the magnitude of the change, many companies had requested that they be given sufficient time to abide with these guidelines. So that was one part which I think was given justifiably by the Reserve Bank to all the companies, and I think close to more than 6 months, and now it's going to be about a year, since the deadline had come out. That's one part. Second is, I think this clarification is helpful also because even, some of our partners where we do payment processing for, which are sort of, let's say, foreign companies, have asked us, specifically what constitutes data which should be stored in India versus, needs to be stored outside. So I think here there is a very clear mention of what kind of data constitutes as payment data and leaving no ambiguity there, starting from anything related to the payment transaction, but also including any form of customer's data, which means name, address, KYC, Aadhaar, or any other kind of data, because that was also, being used as a part of a payment transaction. So I think this clarification is very helpful. I don't know what it means for companies which have not yet, gotten to the step of fully abiding by this. But definitely, I think this will impact more companies, and it will result in more changes for not just for us in terms of making sure that we are compliant to the last line of this clarification, but also, many of our partners and other payment processors.
Okay, Bipin Preet Singh, stay with us. I'm also going across to other guests that we have now joining in on this very special edition of Startup Central. Sanjay Swami of Prime Ventures. I've also got with me Rahul Mathan of Trilegal. You all know him well. He's often on ET Now. He writes very often on all of these topics as well, whether it's e-commerce, retail, and even data protection. Rahul, I'm going to come to you first. You talk about this very often. Just a few minutes back, we've seen this stance come out by the Reserve Bank of India. You're the lawyer that we have on the panel. How is life going to change for all of these companies that we're talking about? I'm guessing in the layman's terms that if I now buy something on Amazon, Amazon is going to have to keep my data local, my credit card details local, and it cannot share that overseas. It cannot be on the servers abroad. It's going to have to make those arrangements.
Look, Nayantara, I haven't read the clarification that's been issued, but just in terms of that specific example that you provided us, this is an RBI notification, and so it would apply to the entities that RBI regulates. And so only to the extent that an entity falls within the purview of an RBI regulated entity would these current regulations that you're speaking about apply. There are, of course, data localization provisions in the draft PDP bill. There are data localization requirements in the e-commerce policy, all of which are still in a draft form, and we're going to need to figure out what the details of that are. But just in terms of your broader question, how are things going to change once localization happens? I think the point is that the way in which most companies operate is that they don't really focus on where they place their data in terms of the fact that we've got the whole world in which to place data in the most optimal manner. Once you have localization requirements, you've got to re-engineer the way in which you've set up your entire business to ensure that whatever is covered within the localization requirement stays within India. And I think that's a non-trivial undertaking. I think as much as the RBI may have provided some clarity as to what the definition of payment data is, and I haven't seen it, so I'd like to get into that in a little more detail. But if you think about all the things that happen with payment, there's all sorts of metadata that attaches to a payment transaction, and if you are requiring companies to fix all of that metadata also in India, it is a very, very large undertaking, and I don't even think I don't even know if companies are set up to organize themselves for that. If it's the pure payment data, which is the person who made the payment and the person who received the payment, that's a far more that's far easier thing to do, and I think that if there's a requirement to do that, it might be possible for companies to achieve that, and I think in implementing this, the government needs to is almost obliged to provide a high degree of clarity to companies as to what they need to do in order to comply.
Yeah. Okay, stay with us, Rahul. Those are some very valid points. And of course, the devil is always in the detail and in the fine print, isn't it? For now, we know that the RBI is sticking to its stance. Let me just go across to Sanjay Swami very quickly. Sanjay, there had been certain hopes that we would actually see maybe the Reserve Bank change its mind. All of this was also valid till the month of October. But it seems for now the central bank sticking to its stance, reiterating that. Very, very clear on data localization. Piyush Goyal, incidentally, in Lok Sabha today said Indo-US business relations cannot be at the cost of national security. That's a big hint towards India's stance on data localization.
Yes, absolutely. I think, I think there's no question. I mean, let's look at it from a India perspective, right? Ignoring the dates and the timelines, which I see as tactical steps here. I think the reality is, we are a billion Indians coming online. A lot of this is our data. And, if data is the new oil, then the refinery should be in India. Why not, right? So I think we do want to have the data local here. And, I think all companies, will be investing in creating centers of excellence of, whether it's on data processing, artificial intelligence, and so on. So I think the macro picture is actually, very important to understand. This is not like a tactical move here where we are just doing it for the sake of doing it. We actually have, I believe, a longer-term plan of saying that, data is very important and we need to have our data in the country. And that's what, we're starting off here. Clearly, financial services, transaction data is, and customer data is very important. And, this is the first of what I expect many things that are going to be required to be stored here in India. I know there will be a lot of pain. As a VC is invested in several financial services startups, we have advised all of them. And I don't think any of them are necessarily in trouble right now because they have already moved most of their data to local, cloud storage service providers. It will have some hardship, but, all of these things, we can't be, as a regulator, RBI has to take a stance and and the same thing happened 10 years ago when India moved, the first country to move to, SMS alerts, country to move to, verified by Visa or, two-factor authentication for digital transactions, right? So, I think it's a good sign and, there will be some short-term challenges, but over time, it'll appear like the right thing we did. Having said that, I think there has to be some view of, what happens with derived intelligence. You can't be having everything here locally. So there will be some boundaries that will probably get changed.
So Sanjay, you're saying this is a good thing. You're also anticipating that other data will soon be described that will have to be kept localized. I'm going to come back to you on that point. But Bipin, I have another question. This is perhaps going to impact credit card companies a lot more than it's going to impact firms like yours. Is this a huge opportunity? Is this another chance for digital payments outside of credit cards to really grow and leapfrog?
I don't think so. I think, already from what I know that the digital payment operators in India, already have much higher magnitude of users and transactions compared to the credit card users. Credit card users in India are only 45 million. Surely debit cards are there, but debit card data, I think, is probably stored in India already. And that's 800, 900 million people. But I think here the data that is maybe impacting going to impact the card schemes bigger than more than anybody else, which includes basically Visa, MasterCard, Amex. And I think they operate global interconnected networks. And for them, it's definitely a big challenge to move all parts of a country-specific transaction and keep them in a particular country like India, because remember, they operate not just in India, but almost every other country in the world. So I think it's the biggest issue has been with companies like them. But these are also very big companies which I think are well equipped to handle these kind of changes. And I agree with Sanjay that the nature of this change is definitely big and it's definitely impactful, but in the long run, it's necessary because in India, remember, we still are very, very low on the per capita income, but we are very, very large, becoming very, very large on the data, digital data that is being generated, especially digital payment data. And this digital payment data is the foundation for creation of financial services and fintech, as well as many other services, including loans, distribution of loans, insurance, wealth management, e-commerce. There's a lot that this data is useful for. And I think, therefore, from that perspective also, it makes sense that, this data is being stored in India. If you ask about our point of view, we think it will not positively or negatively impact either us versus, the credit card companies. But definitely the direction that is being taken shows that, our country and our regulators now have become strong enough to take stands like these in light of sort of competitive evolution that is happening across all the world in all different countries, including China, US, and Europe. And I think we must do what is in the best interests of the Indian customers as well as the Indian businesses. And I think that is what is being done today.
Okay, I take your point. And I want to take that forward now with the lawyer that we have on the panel. Rahul, I'm coming back to you. You've heard now what Sanjay Swami as well as Bipin, the founder of MobiKwik, had to say. But, I want to raise this also in the larger context. I started this show by saying the Reserve Bank of India has stuck to its stance on a day where Mike Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, is here. It is also coming at a time when India is looking at a new retail policy. It's talking about a new e-commerce policy. Now, e-commerce is also dominated primarily by the American companies. You've seen, for example, Walmart make that $16 billion gamble when it comes to India. When you put all of this together, the regulatory challenges for doing business in India, how is that going to really pan out? We still have FDI in retail when many are of the view that is completely redundant and an outdated concept.
Okay, so look, FDI in retail and the history of FDI in e-commerce are quite closely linked. And, for a very long time, the Indian government and India as a country has had a restriction on FDI in retail. But very early on, that was linked to e-commerce as well, at a time when we had no e-commerce in the country. And then for about 15 years, there was complete silence from a regulatory perspective, other than just to say that there was this restriction. And then over that entire period, we've had Flipkart build itself up into this huge behemoth, and at the same time, Amazon build itself up on this huge behemoth on the basis of what has subsequently been ratified as a marketplace model. So, I think the point is that we started out restricting retail from the perspective of, I think, protecting grocers and small Indian shopkeepers. It's now got to a point where we've seen these big international e-commerce players actually take over the way in which retail is being done in the country. More people do transactions online, particularly in urban cities, than they do it in the traditional offline methods. And even the traditional offline methods rely very heavily on the distribution networks that online channels provide them. So I think, we sort of in a path-dependent way came to where we are, but I would question whether we need to continue to go down this path. This is probably a good time to reevaluate whether we need to continue to treat both e-commerce as well as FDI in retail on the same basis, and whether we can come up with specific restrictions on FDI in e-commerce and just in the e-commerce sector itself. I think the government may have some legitimate concerns around capital dumping and things like that, but to deal with it from an FDI perspective seems to be just path dependent and nothing else.
Okay, Rahul, with that, I'm going to ask you to hang on. It's time to take a short commercial break, but we're not done talking about e-commerce. We're not done talking about the efforts of the Narendra Modi government to put together a national retail policy, something that we need to see and juxtapose with the RBI sticking its stance. Yes, we still go and buy from the brick and mortar stores. Yes, we still like to go to shopping malls, but we also like to buy online. We're going to look at all of this holistically when we return after the short commercial break, and we've got a very exciting new panel also lined up, so stay tuned. We'll be back in less than 2 minutes. Welcome back. You're watching Startup Central. I'm Nayantara Rai. This is, of course, the brand new Startup Central. First up, it's 60 minutes long. The only show of its kind on Indian television dedicated to startups, technology, innovation, disruption, basically anything to do with the new economy. And while we're talking about all of this, the government is still figuring out what its role should be. The Indian startup space actually began with e-commerce. Look no further than Flipkart, the best example, right? And the government is finally thinking what its role should be. It has a draft e-commerce policy in place, one that's not acceptable to most stakeholders. In fact, it affected that mega $16 billion purchase of Walmart of Flipkart. While Piyush Goyal, the Commerce Minister, has said there will be no regulator, he did meet with 25 e-commerce companies as recently as Monday, June 24th. After that, we saw the Flipkart CEO come out with a statement as well on that meeting and future engagements with the government. But can the government actually regulate the online world? Can it even keep pace? I'm going to ask my producer to show you the Flipkart statement that came out soon after the meeting. But one of the questions that we are asking today on Startup Central is that can the government even keep pace with regulations when it comes to the new economy? While it's looking at defining a marketplace, which had been defined, which is what Amazon, Flipkart, Nykaa and all of that work on, you're already seeing hyper-localism becoming the buzzword. Look no further than a Meesho, for example, or a Dyson or a Bulbul. So clearly, the rules of the game change every day. So we're going to be discussing, does the government have any business being in this business at all? Before I go any further, let's just first hear out the man who's in charge of the new e-commerce policy, the man who's meeting the e-commerce companies, the man who's putting together the new retail policy and trying to fix irritants with the United States government with respect to Amazon and Walmart. Here's Piyush Goyal today in Parliament.
India engages with the United States on a number of diplomatic, strategic, trade issues, all of which are on the basis of sovereign interests of the country. Both countries protect their mutual trade and business interests. Both countries protect their strategic interests. And given the relationship that have been developed in the last 5 years with the United States, we have today a strong strategic partnership with the United States of America. But one thing is very clear. This government, led by Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, will never, ever compromise on national security and national sovereignty. And at no point of time will trade negotiations be allowed to overtake what is in the national interest and interest of the people of India.
Right. I'm now going to go across to two very special guests. One has been with us from the top of the show, Rahul Mathan of Trilegal, and joining us all the way from the United States is Mukesh Aghi. You're very familiar with him. He, of course, represents a whole host of U.S. companies managing the strategic relationship between India and the United States. Mukesh Aghi, this is Nayantara Rai in New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us on the phone line. I believe we made you miss your train, so apologies for that. But, you know, today is turning out to be such an important day. You've got the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in New Delhi just for a day to set the stage of the meeting between Donald Trump and Narendra Modi. At the same time, the RBI has come out reiterating its stance on data localization, and Piyush Goyal in Parliament has also issued a statement on e-commerce, saying it's sticking to its draft e-commerce policy at the moment and takes note of the reservations that have been raised by American companies. Those American companies largely being Amazon as well as Walmart. Mukesh, how big an irritant is this? And how can I look at data localization as well as the e-commerce irritant separately? There is a connection between the two.
Well, I think if you look at the relationship between the two countries is much, much larger, strategic, and also on trade side. I think when you look at it on the strategic side, the relationship is blossoming very, very well. So many agreements have been signed. There's alignment of interests in security on a regional basis. I think on the trade side, when you look at the trade between the two countries is growing. In fact, it's crossed $142 billion. In fact, U.S. exports to India grew last year by 26%. So I think from a trade perspective, things are going very well. Yes, you have disagreements, and which is very, very normal. And I think on the data localization, we'll have to find the right solution which protects local countries' interests, at the same time it serves the customer also well. So I would say that my reaction to the new policy by RBI is let's look at it, let's study it, and let's find a viable solution so we can move this relationship much, much more forward. I think the statement I like to make is don't let the tail wag the dog, because the security relationship is much, much important, and the irritants will keep on coming in. And I think the relationship is so deep and there's maturity, we will find the right solution here.
Yeah, I take your point that, you know, you should look at everything together. And I know you have to catch your next train. So I'm going to make this my final question to you, Mukesh. Just see how with Mike Pompeo in town, the RBI is sticking to its stance on data localization. This is something which has been raised on several occasions. This is never going to be acceptable, is it, to a Visa or a MasterCard? It's going to be impacting the e-commerce companies as well, whether it's an Amazon, for example, or a Walmart, or a whole host of them. So, you know, how are these not big trade irritants? I'm not even getting into the other debate of tariffs and GSPs. Let that be aside. I'm only talking about these two sectors and data localization.
So I think when you look at data localization, the value of data is very close. And the moment you balkanize the data, it starts losing its value. So I think the way we need to find a solution that it is part of the global supply chain, the data itself, but at the same time, it is local. And there are technical solutions, such as mirroring concept, where you're able to keep the data locally, but still be part of global supply chain. So I don't think this is a big issue. We'll find the solution. We're working with the Ministry of Finance, we're working with RBI, we're working with member companies to see how we can serve the interests of the government in India and the citizens at the same time, make sure that there's a value proposition coming from these multinationals.
Okay, and with that, Mukesh, I'm going to let you go. Thanks so much again for joining us all the way from the United States. Hope you catch that next train very quickly. Rahul Mathan, let me come to you. You've been waiting so patiently, and I'd like to thank you for that on behalf of the entire team here at ET Now. A lot of developers today. It's turning out to be a very newsy evening for all of us and our viewers at ET Now. You and I were talking about e-commerce earlier in the day. Piyush Goyal in Parliament recording the reservations of American companies. I asked you before the commercial break that what's the point of even talking about FDI in today's day and age. But when the government is looking at an e-commerce policy, Rahul Matan, shouldn't the first step actually be to define what is e-commerce? For example, is it just what I understand it to be, buying maybe makeup or cosmetics or groceries online? What about, let's say, a fitness app? If I buy a fitness app, is that not e-commerce? If I take some healthcare service delivery, is that not e-commerce? Don't we first need a definition?
We've had a definition for a long time. I think the definition's been around since the early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. If you look at the FDI policy and the press notes from then, there is a clear carve-out for B2B e-commerce, and then in the process of carving it out, they define e-commerce as online goods and services or words to that effect. To answer your specific question, unfortunately, the definition of e-commerce encompasses within it both goods and services, and within goods it encompasses both physical goods as well as digital goods. And in this there are some challenges, but that actually all of those challenges will only come to the surface when you try and regulate some specific aspects of this without thinking about the unintended consequences on the others. So for instance, if you are regulating e-commerce in goods, it makes sense to establish what the government did in press note 2 of 2016, where they said that there is press note 3 of 2016, where they said that there's such a thing as a marketplace model and an inventory model. And it makes sense in the context of goods to have a marketplace of goods and where sellers can come and sell their goods, and an inventory model where you have your own goods and you sell it online. But I don't know how that would translate into services, because it just doesn't make sense to have a marketplace of services as distinct from an inventory of services. So these are the sorts of definitional challenges that come up when you established the definition a very long time ago. You have to follow through that definition just for consistency's sake, and then you want to regulate one part of the industry in one way, and there are unintended consequences in other parts of the industry.
Okay, I take that point, and let me now, raise that very question with the entrepreneur and the promoter of two of these technology companies that we have, Portio as well as Big Basket. K. Ganesh is with us on Skype. K. Ganesh, so we've had a definition from early 2000s. Obviously, it needs to be updated. At that time, for example, we didn't have Swiggy, we didn't have Zomato, we didn't have CureFit, we didn't even have a Big Basket, right? Or a Portio for that matter. My point is that does the government have any business being in this space as well? If it's going to be in this space, should it not be limiting its role to perhaps, let's say, real consumer issues, for example, pricing or monopoly?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very valid question. Given the size and scale of e-commerce, internet-based consumer transactions having gone, it has become a big sector and a big industry, employing millions of people, doing multi-millions of transactions, affecting hundreds of millions of consumers. So it is high time we need to have a policy. So yes, government does have a role. We need to have certain ground rules unambiguously, clearly defined and laid out, so that all the players, whether it's investors from abroad, local entrepreneurs, all of us know clearly what the rules are, and we are able to follow within the rules. The fact is that e-commerce, including Amazon, Flipkart, Walmart, have all operated 100% legally as per the rule that was laid down at that time. So it's good, given the size and scale of industry, that government is laying out very clearly, unambiguously. Where I have a problem with is, like was mentioned, some of it is ambiguous because you have got products and services, you have got apps, you have got digital goods. Therefore, you can't apply the same thing for services and digital goods as for physical goods. That's one problem. Two, while doing this, I think intentionally or unintentionally, there is a government overreach. Government has gone on beyond the point of being a regulator to specify how private companies should do the business, how much pricing they should do. You should not do special deals. You cannot do exclusive deals. Now, that is completely against free market economy. When I launch a new product, I need exclusive deals with some vendors or suppliers. I cannot be democratic. How do I launch an exclusive product? So I will do a specific deal with them, with one vendor, one supplier, and not with everybody. That's how I get my commercial benefit of a launch. So therefore, there are areas where government has stepped into, which really is none of their business, which is for the for the entrepreneur, for the startup, and for the company to define. On the other hand, is it right? For example, private label I cannot do under the new definition and the press notes that have come. It becomes extremely impossible for me to do a private label brand. Margins are in private label brand. So I think it was unintentional. It is a tough subject, therefore they got it. But protecting consumer interest, ensuring that there's a level playing field is very important. I'm very happy that from a e-commerce policy, they have changed it into national retail policy. What we don't need a FDI in e-commerce policy or e-commerce policy. What we need is a full-fledged national retail policy which will cover e-commerce. The reason I'm saying that is even that 6 crore retailers, small traders, need to leverage internet, technology and e-commerce. The supply chain, reducing wastage, increasing margin, getting information on the latest prices, cutting out middlemen, all of that requires huge use of technology. Therefore, the traders need it as much as the big boys or online entrepreneurs. They need it for doing GST calculation. They need to upgrade their infrastructure by a huge margin if they have to stay competitive. Their systems are archaic. GST today requires a very strong computer integration and system.
I take your point.
They will get it only from top companies.
I take your point. You know, maybe one of the entrepreneurs can actually doing a business to help the government do business and stay up to date with it. K. Ganesh, I'm going to come back to you on that one. Sachin Taparia, if I can come to you. Thank you for waiting so patiently. Now, local circles has also been part of this discussion, has been as part of the stakeholder meetings that the Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has been holding. We understand the meeting on Monday where 25 companies ran into midnight. Having said that, what's the sense that you're getting? You know, in the first term of the government, we didn't see this as one of the biggest priority areas. In fact, you know, I think the approach seemed to be let's let it evolve and we'll only enter when it's absolutely necessary. Maybe now the government feels it has become necessary to enter. We've seen complex structures that have come in, complex M&A activities that have also come in. But what is the sense that you're getting? While ease of doing business is very high on the agenda and a big goal, are they clueless or do they know how they're going to achieve it when it comes to the national retail policy and the e-commerce policy?
So the way, you know, what we are seeing and, you know, in discussions, we had an hour discussion yesterday, Nayantara, on the retail policy. And before that, we've been working very closely on the e-commerce policy. I think as it stands today, these are two separate policies that are being worked upon within the government. Within the e-commerce policy, you know, you raised the question about what is e-commerce. We have, you know, submitted to them that, look, e-commerce is sale of any goods or services over the internet. It's as simple as that. So even tickets that are being sold on airline websites actually classify as e-commerce. Tickets or services that we avail for, you know, AC repair all the way to products, you know, which is the traditional e-commerce. So I think that definition we have submitted. They are working on these core e-commerce issues. And one of the other areas where we have given them feedback is that the e-commerce issues, which is your counterfeit issues, which is your hazardous goods not, you know, should not be allowed to be sold, which is your issues like cross-border e-commerce, customer service, they are part of your core e-commerce policy, and that's the way you should look at them. Then you have this entire, you know, data section within the e-commerce policy, which is how aggregate data should be looked as. We think that that should be a separate policy. which is like the business data policy of India, which should cover all, handling of data by all businesses, not just e-commerce, social media, cloud computing, right, but all businesses, even telecom, offline retail, everything, right. So I think there is some discussion going on that the data policy, should that be a separate business data policy? Where should it reside? I think that remains to be seen. But the core e-commerce policy, I think, is very much being worked upon. The timelines are yet to be, determined in terms of when we'll see the next draft, and they're taking feedback. On the retail policy, they are just starting the discussions, initial discussions, and I think the core component there really is how do you reduce the number of licenses that are required in retail. You need somewhere between 5 to 25 licenses depending on what part of retail you are in. There is an insecticide license, there is a music license, there is a fire license, there is a health license, all kinds of licenses. So how do you optimize them? How do you make those licenses meaningful? I think that's, let it only be 3 or 4 licenses, but let them be meaningful. Let them be implemented.
Rahul Mathan, let me come back to you. I think the consumers were left very, very, very disappointed with the new e-commerce policy, simply because they had gotten very accustomed to getting very good deals on the e-commerce websites. Let's be very honest about that. Having said that, the Commerce Minister is believed to have been very categorical that he is not going to allow predatory pricing. He is not going to allow big businesses to pump in capital to offer those discounts. But as we all know, the word jugaad, are we seeing that in the form of cashbacks, for example? And what's wrong with that? Because if you're offering those cashbacks, perhaps you're also making, you're helping in the expansion of the digital economy. You're making the consumers getting used to buying things online, getting credit cards, using NEFT, etc.
Look, this is like Tom and Jerry, right? You are going to find that the government or the regulator is going to come up with new regulations to address new issues, and the entrepreneurs are going to find new loopholes within those new regulations to, build their market share. This is a cat and mouse game that has been going on for a very long time, and I think none of us should be surprised by what is happening. I think the only reason why it is in such sharp focus is because in the digital age, the cycles, the regulatory cycle as well as the new technology cycles are much faster than it has ever been before. And so we're seeing a rapid rate of change, new regulations coming in, and then entrepreneurs coming up with new systems and schemes within, completely legally within those regulatory frameworks to achieve what their commercial goals are. The only reason why we're even talking about this on the show with such frequency is because the cycles in technology are much faster than traditionally.
Yeah. And Rahul, I want to go back to this point, I was trying to make earlier as well, which is that, look at the government. It's now talking about defining a marketplace, which was defined a couple of years ago. That marketplace is now being redefined. The buzzword is hyper-localism. Look what you're seeing through WhatsApp, other instant messages. TikTok, for example, is being monetized. You've had the rise of apps like a Meesho, Dunzo, Bulbul. All of that is actually happening. So having said that, the government possibly can't keep pace. Right? So it's going to define the marketplace once again in a way which is outdated, right, Rahul?
Yeah, look, I think this is the problem with regulating technology, because every time you think you've got a grip on the universe that you've got to regulate, and by the time you set out the laws to regulate that universe, there will be some new innovation that comes up, and hyperlocalism is a good example of that. I think WhatsApp commerce is another great example of the use of technology to achieve commercial ends, this is a challenge for technology policy folks to try and figure out what's the balance. There's one approach which says that the government should just lay out principles. I think some of the other people on the panel mentioned that the government shouldn't interfere in too deeply into these areas. And I think if the government does interfere deeply into these areas, they'll find that they're going to trip themselves up in this manner. So my suggestion to the government is come up with principles for regulation and try to avoid getting specific in terms of defining the universe in narrow, rigid terms. Because I think whenever you do something like that, you end up finding that those narrow, rigid walls are quite easy for tech entrepreneurs to find their own ways around. And then you've got to redefine that universe to capture that thing which you never thought would be utilized by them, but in fact was utilized.
Okay, I take that point. And K. Ganesh, I'm going to ask you once again the question I asked Rahul. The consumers got used to the deep discounts. Cashbacks is just one example of how, what Rahul calls the Tom and Jerry method. Are you seeing any other interesting trends? Because the fact is the consumer has gotten used to the discounts. You are seeing a slowdown in discretionary spend as well. People today have gotten used to looking for deals before they buy anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not just about discount, Nayantara. What is happening is that everything was pretty tough earlier. How many times have we stood in a bank branch queue on a Saturday and Sunday to withdraw cash, to deposit cash, to do that? How many times have we stood in Indian Airlines or a railway counter on queue spending hours and hours to buy tickets? I think that ship has sailed. The consumer has got used to convenience of buying tickets online, buying goods online, not waiting at a bank branch. That thing has sailed. It's good for the consumer. Discount is only one part of it. What about return? Today, thanks to e-commerce, thanks to the trends set by this, returns are no longer a problem. Even retailers take it. So the consumer has moved on, expectations has moved on. That has irrevocably changed. We are not going to go back in a time where you're going to wait in a queue to withdraw money or to book a ticket or to buy a good and not accept 100% no questions asked return. So that I think it's absolutely there. Now cashback, people offline retail, even before this, people have been doing discounts. There have been discount sale. There have been clearance sales. Now cashback is just attracts so much of attention. But deals to get rid of your inventory has been there from times immemorial. End of season sale, even Diwali sale, New Year sale. How many sales we have had? All those are different forms of cashback. So why are we signaling it out? Again, the playing field had to be leveled. I understand the pain of some of the sectors or the people where huge amount of capital is coming in as a form of a discount. Therefore, it's hurting people who don't have access to that kind of capital. But I think we have got used to a different level of convenience and choice.
K. Ganesh, Rahul and Sachin, it's not just about cashbacks. It's not just about cashbacks. In fact, you're in fact seeing a lot of apps that are now coming out which do nothing else but tell you how to stay in touch and up to date with all the best deals. You're seeing many apps flourishing on that. I'm coming to the end of my show. Sachin, I'm going to give you the final word because you've been going to Udyog Bhavan. You've been part of those stakeholder conversations as well. Piyush Goyal time and again in press conferences also said he's not going to allow predatory pricing. Do you think that's going to be at the heart of the e-commerce policy? When you also say that, there are skeptics who believe that how can big discounts not be allowed? You're going to have Mukesh Ambani and Jio come out with the big e-commerce splash that has already been announced, with Mukesh Ambani saying that's the next disruption for India.
So, Nayantara, the way I look at this is I think it's going to be an important part of the e-commerce FDI rules. I think the policy is much broader, which has consumer issues, seller issues, other issues. But I think there are really two things at play here. One is as Ganesh rightly said, using capital to affect the price at which an item sells. There is an MRP and there is a sale price. I think that is what pushback is on, and I think that's the way government is looking at it, is don't influence the price at which a product is listed to be sold on these marketplaces. However, if there is efficiency of procurement, which a retailer can at best offer 20% discount, but because of volumes, because of aggregation, an online marketplace or an online seller can offer 50% discount, I don't think the government should try to influence that or regulate that. predatory pricing should be stopped, but issues like cashback, issues like, if you do 2,500 rupees purchase, you're going to get a, I don't think we can do away with them. E-commerce is about convenience, it is about selection, and it is about deals, right? So I think we need to look at all of that and then say that, look, let's
I come
take
back to my
out.
point that what all is going to be in e-commerce. But if I'm going to order food on Zomato or on Swiggy, is that e-commerce? If I'm going to, use a meditation app, is that e-commerce? I think we're still waiting for that kind of clarity also to come in. We're running out of time. I'd like to thank all three gentlemen for being so patient. We did have breaking news thanks to Reserve Bank of India. And Rahul, I think we lucked out having you on the show. We had planned to talk only about e-commerce, but you talk so much about data protection and data localization. So I guess that was a stroke of luck. And I guess, we need all of that in our early days of the Startup Central series, which has been relaunched. With that, it's a wrap. Many thanks for watching.